Have you ever wondered why you wake up at a certain time, or why you struggle to fall asleep, especially when everything feels still and quiet around you? It might not just be your habits or your blue light addiction. It might be the centuries whispering through your circadian rhythms. Because sleep isn't just biological, it's historical. And you're not just tired. You're participating in a deeply human, ever-evolving ritual that's shaped by candles, clocks, and the occasional curfew bell. Did you know that people in medieval Europe often slept in two distinct chunks? They'd go to bed soon after sundown, rise around midnight to pray, snack, or, let's be honest, steal a little time for sex or neighborly gossip, and then go back to bed for their second sleep. These weren't quirky exceptions, they were entirely normal. In fact, the idea of 8 straight hours of slumber would have seemed ambitious. Or possibly, a sign of grave idleness. As you lie here tonight, tucked under blankets spun from industrial dreams, you probably won't know this, your brain still carries that two-part legacy. That restless wake up around 2 a.m. might not be insomnia. Might just be history, calling. Before you settle in, feel free to like the video if it brought you a little peace. And if you'd like to join us again, we'd love to have you back. Subscribe when you're ready. No pressure, just rest. Share something if you feel like it. Let's slowly drift into tonight's quiet moments together. So, picture a small cottage, flickering with firelight. It's 1,300 something. Outside, the village is cloaked in velvet blackness. No headlights. No hum of city wires. Just the occasional owl or far-off dog. Inside, your body slows with the darkness. There's no Netflix. No bedtime scrolling. Just a wick, a wool blanket, and a well-practiced surrender to the dark. Before artificial light, sleep started early, often within an hour or two after sunset. You drowsed off with the fire dimming beside you. But here's the twist, you didn't stay down till dawn. You'd awaken, naturally, softly, sometime in the middle of the night. It wasn't cause for concern. It was simply part of the cycle. This segmented sleep had a name, first sleep and second sleep. Between the two, you had what researchers now call the watch. A quiet, introspective period around midnight where people would reflect, pray, whisper, or get some very casual farming done by moonlight. Mainstream psychology has since backed this up. Researcher Thomas Ware famously replicated pre-industrial conditions in a study where subjects, deprived of artificial light, gradually reverted to biphasic sleep, 2 chunks, divided by a gentle waking phase. No panic. No melatonin. Just a rhythm forgotten by convenience. And that forgotten rhythm? It's not unique to medieval Europe. Anthropologists have spotted variants of segmented sleep among the Tiv people in Nigeria, rural Chinese farming communities, and even early South American tribes. Which raises the question, was our current model of one clean sleep ever natural? Or just industrially enforced? There's ongoing debate among philosophers about whether continuous sleep is a product of progress or a performance of productivity. Either way, history suggests that sleep wasn't always linear. It was layered. Social. Sometimes even communal. In pre-industrial households, entire families, sometimes even neighbors, would bundle up together, sharing warmth, stories, and snores. Of course, that came with its own sleep politics. Not everyone had the luxury of bedtime. Servants might stay up later than their employers, waiting to douse lamps and secure doors. Some towns had night watchmen, who roamed streets to ward off danger, and sometimes just boredom. And then there were curfews. Yes, actual enforced lights-out orders. In medieval Paris, for example, a bell would ring at sunset, marking the couvre-feu, or cover fire, when people were ordered to extinguish open flames and stay indoors. It's where we get the modern term, curfew. Not just for unruly teenagers anymore, huh? In this world, night was sacred but risky. Darkness wasn't romantic, it was dangerous. No street lamps, number 911, number 24-hour diners. So people adapted. They clustered together, locked doors early, and shaped their sleep around safety. And maybe, just maybe, that's why you sometimes sleep better in crowded airports or cozy group cabins. Something ancient stirs at the sound of someone else breathing nearby. And the dreams? Oh, the dreams. With segmented sleep came deeper dreaming. That midnight window often coincided with vivid REM cycles and creative visions. Some historians argue that early morning prayers doubled as dreamy confessionals, not because people sinned more in the dark, but because they remembered their dreams more vividly. Weirdly, there's even fringe speculation, though not all scholars are on board, that many historical visions, ghost sightings, or even religious epiphanies occurred during this between-sleep state. Your brain, still steeped in REM, blending fantasy and wakefulness in a twilight cocktail. So tonight, if you find yourself awake and confused at 2:13 a.m., maybe don't fight it. Maybe that's your body remembering what the candlelit world already knew. Sleep isn't a switch you flip. It's a tide that comes in waves. And as this tide recedes gently into the next century, it leaves behind traces, faint footprints, shadowy yawn patterns, that take us deeper into how sleep began to bend around something darker than candlelight. So now you're drifting along through medieval darkness, nestled between first and second sleeps. But as dawn begins to edge over thatched rooftops, something shifts in the rhythm of the world. The village stirs. The chickens stretch. And the plague, well, it spreads. You probably didn't expect that cozy bedtime tale to segue into pestilence, but here we are. Because if candlelight shaped your sleep's tempo, class and catastrophe dictated whether you got to sleep at all. Imagine being a peasant in 14th century Europe. Your daily labor began before the sun and ended after it. You worked the land, served a lord, and slept where you could, on straw, under burlap, beside animals that snored louder than your in-laws. Sleep wasn't sacred, it was snatched. Broken. Stolen in pieces between hunger and hoofbeats. Meanwhile, the wealthy? They reclined. In proper beds. With feather mattresses and embroidered nightcaps that looked like something between a cupcake wrapper and a pride flag. And while you're imagining class-based slumber, here comes the real sleep thief, the Black Death. Around 1347, the plague bulldozed through Europe like an uninvited party guest with a coffin. But what it did to sleep? That's more subtle, and strangely familiar. People became afraid to sleep alone. Or to sleep too deeply. Or to sleep at all. During outbreaks, fear warped nocturnal life. In cities like Florence and Paris, night watches expanded. Bells rang not to announce curfew, but to toll for the dead. Some slept armed. Others, sleepless, prayed through the night in churches lit like desperate sanctuaries. And for those already sick, sleep blurred into feverish delirium. Nightmares and real screams became indistinguishable. Modern psychology has found that pandemics, yes, even recent ones, disrupt sleep in strikingly similar ways. A 2020 meta-analysis found widespread insomnia, delayed bedtimes, and fragmented sleep among people living through COVID-19. Some of it was fear. Some of it was grief. But a lot of it was simply the nervous system refusing to rest under invisible threat. And centuries ago, with less knowledge and no antibiotics, threat wasn't just invisible, it was unknowable. Here's a curious tidbit. In some medieval towns, people used plague charms, little talismans or scrolls, placed under pillows to ward off bad spirits during sleep. The line between dreams and demons was as thin as a cobweb. One surviving charm warned that sleeping too long during pestilence made the soul vulnerable. Imagine lying down with that on your mind. Philosophers still debate whether these rituals were spiritual safeguards or just psychological coping mechanisms. But either way, it's a haunting reminder, the more fragile the world felt, the more fragile sleep became. And yet, in spite of death's drumbeat, many still found small ways to reclaim nighttime. Some towns held processions by moonlight. Others held vigils. Entire communities would sing or chant through the darkest hours, half out of faith, half out of shared insomnia. Sleep turned social again, not by choice, but by consequence. Class still played a role. If you were noble, you could retreat to a rural estate, away from contagion. If you were poor, you stayed. You served. You swept ash from the steps of empty homes and hoped you weren't next. Sleep, when it came, was the exhausted surrender of someone who had no other refuge. Even today, socioeconomics still mark our sleep. People in lower income brackets are statistically more likely to suffer from insomnia, sleep apnea, and inconsistent schedules. Wealth buys rest. It always has. But something else was happening, too, something that would echo through centuries. As plagues forced curfews and closed city gates, structured time emerged. Bell towers rang out set hours. Towns regulated noise. Even sleep became regimented under public health mandates. This was the creeping start of what historians call clock time. Time not marked by sun or stomach, but by authority. And it's easy to scoff at that from your mattress, where you might set your own bedtime, or snooze your own alarms. But many of our sleep anxieties stem from that tension, the push-pull between internal rhythm and external demand. The medieval world showed us what happened when those forces collided. And often, it wasn't insomnia that plagued them, it was interrupted humanity. Grief. Guilt. Gratitude. And somehow, despite everything, dreams. Some records mention dream journals kept by monks who treated them as signs from God. During plague years, dreams grew darker. People saw angels. Or fires. Or their own coffins. One nun reportedly dreamed of the Virgin Mary gently placing a cloth over her face, possibly history's first metaphorical sleep mask. But tucked among these night terrors were softer fragments. A boy who dreamed of a field with no graves. A farmer who said he heard his wife's laughter in a dream weeks after she passed. The subconscious still trying to soothe, even when waking life could not. And perhaps, that's the biggest inheritance from this chapter, the resilience of rest. Even under curfews and contagion, humans kept dreaming. Kept sleeping. However poorly, however patchily, they sought the night. And in that patchwork of candlelight, class, and catastrophe, a new pattern emerged, one that began to be codified by bell towers and belief. That shift in energy leads us into something else. Something surprisingly loud. You see, just as curfews wound down and plagues retreated, another force began to organize time, and sleep, with surgical precision, the church. As your mind drifts deeper into the past, the world takes on a peculiar rhythm, one not governed by nature or fear, but by prayer. Bells toll, not for the dead this time, but for the living. For monks rising before dawn. For nuns kneeling in stone-walled chapels. For spiritual devotion that divides the night into strict parcels of consciousness. Welcome to the monastery, where sleep isn't yours. It's God's. Imagine you're a novice in a Benedictine abbey in the 9th century. Your bed is narrow, your mattress is straw, and your alarm clock is a very insistent bell that chimes at 2:45 a.m., sharp. That's Matins, the first of 8 daily prayers known as the Divine Office. You rise without complaint, shuffle half asleep to the chapel, and chant in Latin alongside others who are equally holy and equally exhausted. The monastic schedule wasn't just a religious duty, it was a sleep experiment centuries ahead of its time. Scholars now call it polyphasic sleep, multiple short sleep periods scattered through 24 hours. But for these monks and nuns, it wasn't biohacking. It was salvation. Mainstream sleep studies have confirmed that polyphasic schedules can work, under certain conditions. Some research shows short naps and scheduled wakes can maintain alertness and cognitive function, especially in controlled environments. Sound familiar? The quirk? Many monks reported that these midnight wake-ups brought clarity, peace, even euphoria. Some even claim that these hours, cold, dark, and hovering just above silence, were the most spiritually fertile times of the day. Maybe it's because REM sleep just ended. Maybe it's divine caffeine. The debate continues. Philosophers still argue whether these nocturnal rituals were spiritually effective or psychologically manipulative. Did breaking sleep repeatedly foster discipline, or simply keep monks too groggy to sin? Outside the monastery, the influence was no less profound. As monasteries kept time with bells, nearby towns began to align their own activities with those chimes. It was the earliest form of broadcast timekeeping. You might not own a sundial, but if you could hear the abbey bell, you knew when to eat, when to pray, when to rest. Suddenly, sleep wasn't just personal. It was communal, institutional, theological. Your bedtime might reflect your piety, or your resistance. One fringe belief, floating around lesser-known Christian sects, was that excessive sleep dulled the soul. Some took this literally, advocating 4 hours a night and claiming that dreams were a distraction from the divine. Others took a gentler path, treating dreams as prophecy, symbols, or divine whisperings. The problem? Most people couldn't agree which dreams were spiritual and which were, well, cheese-induced nonsense. One rather curious case, a 12th century nun named Hildegard of Bingen claimed vivid dreams filled with cosmic spirals and fiery tongues, visions so intense they became illuminated manuscripts. Some modern psychologists propose she may have experienced migraines or even temporal lobe epilepsy. Others say she just really knew how to sleep epically. But even outside monasteries, the echoes of this night-chopping, bell-driven lifestyle began to ripple. In villages, people structured sleep around chores and worship. They might rise before dawn for prayers, nap at midday, and rest again after sundown. Fragmented, yes, but often aligned with natural tiredness. Contrast that with how we define sleep now: consolidated, tracked, optimized. Back then, sleep was flexible, spiritual, and tied to an ever-ringing bell tower. One study published in the Journal of Sleep Research suggested that people forced into regimented nighttime interruptions, if framed within purpose or community, often adapted without long-term harm. Which might explain why monks didn't all collapse from exhaustion. In fact, some lived to be surprisingly old, considering their questionable protein intake and penchant for early morning chants. And here's a fringe fact to file away: in some orders, monks slept sitting up. Yes, upright. To avoid temptation, to be always ready for prayer, or simply because their beds were glorified benches. Imagine trying to get comfortable with nothing but a wool tunic, a candle stub, and the occasional rat sighting. Still, even in this austere lifestyle, rest remained necessary. Holy men and women learned how to drift in and out of light sleep like candle flames, brief but sustaining. Their rest reflected their purpose. Their fatigue was devotion. The irony? Today's high achievers pay top dollar to mimic the very sleep patterns once endured by monks. They experiment with polyphasic sleep. They take power naps in high-end pods. They meditate themselves into micro-dreams between meetings. And meanwhile, the ancient rhythm of bells and breath keeps echoing. Your body, though softened by memory foam and blackout curtains, still recognizes something in those midnight wake-ups. Something familiar. Something old. You might not pray, but you do stare at the ceiling in the dark, listening to your own heartbeat like a metronome. That bell, real or imagined, still tolls. And as we slip out of the cloisters and back into the world beyond abbey walls, we enter a new phase of sleep history. One where global ambition and colonial calendars begin to fracture rest in a whole new way. Because next, sleep must learn to travel. To colonize. To serve the empires. The bell fades behind you now, swallowed by the swell of the sea. You're no longer in a quiet chapel but aboard a creaking wooden ship, eyes stinging from salt and sleep deprivation. Because this is the age of empire, and sleep, once tethered to church bells and cottage hearths, now answers to cannons, commerce, and colonial clocks. Welcome to the world of jet-lagged colonizers, before jets were even invented. Imagine crossing time zones before the concept of time zones existed. In the 16th century, European sailors carried their circadian rhythms across oceans, only to have them unraveled by heat, strange stars, and diseases they couldn't pronounce. Sleep was broken not by digital addiction but by tropical storms and malaria hallucinations. The British East India Company, for example, didn't just export spices, it exported a model of European time discipline. Colonizers built clocks into church towers, installed bedtime curfews, and introduced segmented work-rest schedules into places where naps, late-night community rituals, and early morning markets had once shaped local rhythms. Indigenous sleep patterns, often polyphasic, seasonally adjusted, and community-centric, were often viewed as lazy or unproductive. Which, in hindsight, is hilariously ironic coming from people in wigs who needed 6 people to help them put on socks. Mainstream psychology has only recently begun re-evaluating how colonialism disrupted sleep. A 2018 study in Current Anthropology looked at how colonial regimes imposed Western sleep standards on Indigenous Australians, disrupting their ancestral rest cycles and contributing to long-term mental health impacts. Sleep wasn't just taken, it was reframed as a moral failing. Fringe Theory Corner, there's a claim, though still debated, that certain colonial officers tried to suppress siesta practices in tropical colonies, fearing that long midday rests reduced discipline. Of course, the officers themselves napped, behind closed doors, draped in linen, armed with fans and indifference. It's still an open question in philosophy whether Western sleep norms were tools of cultural superiority or accidents of logistics. Did empire intentionally fragment native rhythms, or was it simply the byproduct of grafting factory time onto jungle heat? Either way, this imperial sleep model didn't just shape colonies. It reshaped the colonizers themselves. Take the Victorian gentleman. Back home in London, he was expected to rise early, dominate his day, and avoid anything as frivolous as a nap unless he had fainted stylishly. But once stationed in India, Africa, or the Caribbean, his schedule unraveled. Nights were too hot to sleep. Days too long to stay conscious. So, tiffin time emerged, a polite euphemism for food, drink, and, more covertly, rest. This clash of climates and customs created a strange sleep dance. Colonizers adhered to rigid schedules in public but stole naps in private. Meanwhile, local populations continued their ancestral rhythms, until schools, railways, and church bells gradually imposed the empire's model. One study of early 20th century Kenya found that children in missionary-run schools were punished for dozing during hot afternoons, despite temperatures exceeding 38 degrees Celsius 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Nap culture became resistance. And resistance became weariness. And then there's the curious case of the empire's doctors. Medical officers stationed abroad began documenting exotic sleep syndromes. Some claimed locals suffered from tropical lethargy. Others described siesta-induced apathy. In reality, most of these so-called conditions were just reactions to heat, hunger, or colonial stress. But the pattern was clear: sleep that didn't fit the European mold was medicalized, pathologized, erased. Even at home, the effects echoed. Empire required coordination across distances. Enter the telegraph. Suddenly, messages could fly across oceans, and expectations followed. A decision made in London might be relayed to India overnight, pushing colonial staff into round-the-clock readiness. Sleep began to stretch and strain under the pressure of global synchrony. Today, we call this asynchronous burnout. Back then, it was just business. Yet, amidst this bureaucratic fatigue, some people began to document their dreams. Officers recorded nightmares of rebellion, of heat, of being lost. One even dreamed of being swallowed by a pocket watch. Interpret that how you will. There's also a strange footnote in sleep history worth mentioning here. Some colonizers began to adopt local sleeping habits out of desperation. Hammocks, afternoon siestas, nighttime walks. In letters home, they described their guilt about enjoying native comforts, proof that even stolen rest came with imperial shame. You see, sleep was never neutral in the age of empire. It was a cultural battleground, a medical experiment, and a quiet form of dominance. Who slept, when, and how became a reflection of who held power, and who was being reshaped by it. And you? You're still feeling the tremors. Your 9 to 5 may be a holdover from British bureaucracy. Your guilt over napping might be the echo of Protestant work ethic. Your craving for a Sunday lion may be a silent rebellion against centuries of clock watching. As global travel surged in the late 1800s, so did sleep disorientation. But without time zones, it was chaos. Train schedules overlapped. Noon in Paris was not noon in Prague. And sleep got caught in the tangle. No one knew quite when to rest. Or why they felt off. They just called it railway fatigue, an early cousin of jet lag. And here's your cheeky reality check. Jet lag isn't just a biological glitch. It's a historical scar. Your body, confused at 3 a.m. in Tokyo, isn't just coping with melatonin. It's mourning the loss of rooted time. And as industrial ambition ramps up and sleep grows ever more endangered, something else starts to burn. Because next, we'll watch sleep go up in smoke, both ends of the candle lit, both eyes wide open. Enlightenment arrives, and with it, insomnia with a powdered wig. That flicker in the dark isn't just a candle, it's a warning. You're in the 18th century now, and things are getting brighter. Louder. Sleepless in a whole new way. Because as Enlightenment thinkers stroke their chins and compose manifestos by lamplight, something curious is happening to sleep. It's being voluntarily sacrificed on the altar of intellect. Gone are the midnight prayers and solemn silences. Now it's salons, arguments, ink stains, and an awful lot of coffee. You've entered the era where staying up late is no longer suspicious, it's sophisticated. Imagine this, it's 1753, and you're perched in a Parisian cafe at 1 a.m. Philosophers around you are mid-debate. Voltaire just insulted Rousseau's mother. Someone is sketching celestial models on a napkin, and no one's remotely close to going home. Why? Because the Enlightenment ideal wasn't just about reason, it was about transcending bodily needs. And what's more base and animalistic than sleep? Mainstream psychology often frames this shift as the rise of volitional sleep deprivation, not caused by stress or trauma, but by a conscious choice to delay rest. The reward? Productivity. Genius. Or at least the illusion of it. In fact, some Enlightenment thinkers wore their sleep deprivation like a badge of honor. Voltaire reportedly consumed up to 40 cups of coffee a day and wrote late into the night. Benjamin Franklin, though famously fond of early to bed, often contradicted himself by staying up to write about electricity and moral virtue well past midnight. Hypocrites, the both of them, but productive ones. Fringe detail for your pillow tonight, there were candle taxes in several European cities at the time. The cost of staying up late wasn't just mental, it was literal. Some families rationed candles, saving light for special nights or guests. Others found clever ways to hide their flames, like hollowed-out books or reflective surfaces to amplify glow. Because burning through your wax allowance too quickly? That was as reckless as maxing out your streaming services today. Philosophers still argue whether the Enlightenment's glorification of wakefulness birthed modern insomnia, or merely exposed it. Did sleeplessness become more common, or just more socially acceptable among the elite? Regardless, something crucial shifted. Sleep was no longer just biological. It became ideological. To sleep too much meant to waste one's mind. To rise late was to lack discipline. Enlightenment culture drew a sharp line between the rational, industrious sleeper and the lazy, indulgent dreamer. Even dreams themselves were called into question, dismissed as irrational noise rather than mystical messages or emotional insights. Except, of course, when they weren't. Because for every skeptic scorning the subconscious, there was a romantic, or proto-psychologist, scribbling down dream diaries. The idea that dreams could contain meaning still lingered, even as Freud remained decades away. One notable case? Emanuel Swedenborg, a Swedish theologian who claimed to enter divine realms in his dreams. Some thought him enlightened. Others thought him in urgent need of a nap and a sandwich. Yet across Europe, the nightly world became more electric, metaphorically for now. The cafe became a substitute for the hearth. Letters were exchanged at midnight. Some cities even had social hours, between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., meaning if you were asleep then, you were socially dead. Even women's sleep began to shift. In upper-class households, Women were expected to be graceful in the morning and charming at night, often pulling double duty by attending events that started after dusk and hosting guests well past what should have been bedtime. Their insomnia wasn't pathology. It was performance. And don't forget the coffeehouses. The 18th century equivalent of co-working spaces, minus the Wi-Fi and with significantly more powdered wigs. These dens of caffeine and chaos kept people talking, reading, debating, and, crucially, awake. They normalized the idea that serious thought could and should happen late into the night. And that idea? It stuck. Today, you still feel it in those late night, just one more chapter, moments, or when you binge-watch documentaries about philosophy and suddenly realize it's 2 a.m., and you've learned nothing but how smug Nietzsche sounds when narrated by British voiceovers. Sleep, under the Enlightenment's lantern, became negotiable. You weren't waiting for the sun, you were chasing the mind. But here's a reality check. Just because someone's writing brilliant essays at midnight doesn't mean their body likes it. Chronic sleep deprivation began to rear its head. Writers complained of trembling hands, mood swings, and what they vaguely called nervous disorders. No one connected it to disrupted circadian rhythms, of course. They just assumed genius came at a price. And oh, what a price. As the century wore on, candlelight gave way to gas lamps. Even brighter. Even longer hours. Even less sleep. Cities like London and Berlin glowed at night like fireflies on espresso. Sleep was pushed further and further into the margins. In this light-soaked, logic-drunk world, one emotion began to whisper in the shadows: anxiety. Not quite diagnosable yet. Not Freud's domain. Just a low hum, an unease that maybe all this wakefulness wasn't sustainable. But you couldn't say that aloud. You had a pamphlet to publish. A duel to attend. An opera to sit through while pretending you understood the libretto. So, the Enlightenment marched on. Burning candles. Writing treatises. Compromising sleep in exchange for legacy. And that insomnia? It wasn't confined to minds full of equations and manifestos. It began seeping into factories, into train stations, into a pulsing new world powered not by wax or gas, but by steam. Because as the Enlightenment gave way to the Industrial Revolution, the question stopped being why we sleep, and became when we were allowed to. You can feel it now, the rhythm changing again. The soft clink of teacups and candle holders is replaced by the metallic gasp of pistons and gears. Smoke rises. The sun still hangs in the sky, but it's no longer in charge. Time has a new master, the factory whistle. This is the Industrial Revolution, where sleep doesn't just shrink, it shatters. Imagine waking before dawn to stumble through soot-choked streets toward a textile mill. Your shift begins at 5 a.m., ends at 8 p.m., and includes just one break for something that can generously be called lunch. By the time you return home, it's dark again. You collapse into bed, not to rest, but to recover. And then the cycle repeats. The industrial age didn't just introduce machines. It introduced a brutal efficiency that turned time, and by extension, sleep, into currency. The old ways of rest, shaped by seasons, weather, or even candle availability, were no longer relevant. What mattered now was productivity. Output. Speed. Mainstream psychology notes that this era saw the first widespread reports of functional insomnia, people unable to sleep not because they were philosophizing at 3 a.m., but because they were overworked and underrested. Their bodies were exhausted, but their nervous systems remained wired from the stress of endless repetition and mechanical noise. And here's where it gets interesting. Some of the earliest sleep studies were conducted during this time, not out of curiosity, but to measure labor efficiency. Factory owners wanted to know how little sleep workers could survive on before they became useless. It was science, but with a time card. One fringe case. A mill in Manchester that kept detailed logs of how workers' reaction times slowed after 6 consecutive days of less than 5 hours of sleep. Not because they cared about the workers' well-being, but because they noticed more accidents on the factory floor. If your sleep-deprived brain caused a cog to snap or a loom to jam, that was profit leaking through the cracks. Scholars in philosophy still wrestle with whether the Industrial Revolution represents the true death of natural sleep, or just its commodification. Was it stolen? Sold? Or simply reshaped beyond recognition? What's certain is that everything became rigid. Fixed. Regimented. Shift work was born. So was the 8-hour day, though, at first, it was just a pipe dream. By the late 1800s, labor activists began rallying for 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for what we will. A beautiful slogan, but also a sign that sleep had become political. Something to demand. To protect. To idealize. Before that, many workers, especially children, slept in brief windows between double shifts. They learned to nap upright, with boots still laced. Night workers were paid less, yet risked more. One early railroad report described conductors falling asleep on the job and causing deadly crashes. Sleep wasn't just a luxury, it was a liability. And what about women? Factory girls in industrial towns often lived in dormitories near the mills. Their schedules were tightly controlled. Lights out at 9 p.m., wake-up bells at 4. Their sleep was monitored, like everything else. One strange policy at a Massachusetts mill warned against dreaming of foolish things, as if subconscious rebellion was just as dangerous as skipping work. This wasn't an isolated case. In urban centers, even architecture shifted to support this new sleep regime. Tenement housing crammed families into tiny, dark rooms with no airflow and constant noise. Sleep became shallow. Disturbed. Vulnerable. Meanwhile, the wealthy, those who owned the factories, began romanticizing sleep again. They commissioned plush beds. Designed private bedrooms with blackout curtains. They read books about proper sleeping posture while their employees snored into their elbows on burlap sacks. There's even a curious example. Thomas Edison, the beloved light bulb guy, reportedly claimed he only needed 4 hours of sleep a night. He considered sleep a waste of time and even tried to condition his employees to adopt his schedule. Spoiler, it didn't work well. Ironically, some now suspect he took frequent naps, micro-rests, hidden behind bravado. But light, the very thing he helped mass-produce, was the final nail in natural sleep's coffin. Once gas and electric lamps became widespread, the human day expanded unnaturally. You no longer had to wind down at sunset. You could keep going. And going. And so we did. Psychology studies have since shown that artificial light delays melatonin release, disrupting sleep cycles. Your body wants darkness. The factory wants production. Guess who wins? And through all this, dreams began to fade. Not vanish, but fade into the background. When sleep becomes recovery rather than reflection, dreams get less airtime. Your subconscious doesn't have time to wander, it's triaging. Still, sleep fought back. The nap refused to die. Some workers snuck in quick rests during lunch breaks. One shoe factory installed a resting bench, unofficially reserved for workers about to faint. People found ways to steal sleep, just like they once stole kisses during the watch between first and second slumber. And here's your reality check: shift work still messes with sleep. A study published in Sleep Health found that modern shift workers experience higher rates of depression, cardiovascular issues, and cognitive decline, all tied to poor sleep hygiene. We haven't evolved past the factory floor. We've just moved it online. You? Maybe you check emails at midnight. Or wake up at 5 a.m. because your calendar says so. You might think you're choosing that. But centuries of machinery are humming beneath your mattress. And that hum? It'll get louder still. Because while factories clanged and cities glowed, another force slipped quietly under the door. A force that snuck into bedrooms lined with lace and velvet. One that told women not only how to sleep, but how to worry about doing it correctly. That force was Victorian anxiety. So now, the machines outside are humming, the cities are glowing, and inside the house, fringed lampshades casting shadows across wallpapered walls, a new kind of unrest is settling in. You're in the Victorian era, and sleep isn't merely dictated by factory bells or gaslight anymore. It's being quietly dissected inside parlors, whispered about behind fans, and medicalized with exquisite concern. Welcome to the age of worry. Specifically, feminine worry. Because in this chapter of sleep history, rest becomes a reflection of morality, and no one bears that burden more than Victorian women. Imagine yourself as a middle or upper-class woman in 1882. You've got a fainting couch, a corset that can crack a rib, and an entire culture breathing down your neck about how a proper lady should behave, even in her dreams. Your job isn't to earn a wage or manage machines. Your job is to embody grace, emotional restraint, and if possible, sleep like a passive porcelain angel. But beneath all that lace and lavender water? A gnawing insomnia that no one can quite name. Mainstream psychology acknowledges that the 19th century saw an explosion of nervous disorders, especially among women. Diagnoses like neurasthenia, hysteria, and female fatigue became all the rage. Doctors often attributed sleeplessness to overexcitement, weak constitutions, or, wait for it, reading too many novels. Fringe fact incoming: one real Victorian medical text advised sleepless women to stop reading books with foreign plots, lest the brain overheat with unruly ideas. Heaven forbid your subconscious develop a French accent. Philosophers continue to debate whether these conditions reflected actual mental health issues or were simply products of a patriarchal society. Was hysteria truly a sleep disorder, or just a convenient label used to control women who were emotionally complex and lacked personal freedom? Whatever the cause, the treatments were creative. Some women were prescribed rest cures, which essentially involved lying in bed, not talking, not reading, and drinking fatty milk for weeks. Others were told to avoid stimulating thoughts before bed. Still others were given opium, chloral hydrate, or laudanum in little glass vials that clinked softly in velvet purses. And here's where it gets even more peculiar: sleep itself became gendered. Men were expected to sleep deeply, unbothered, like bears in waistcoats. Women, on the other hand, were told their bodies were too delicate for uninterrupted rest. If you awoke often in the night, it meant you were refined, sensitive, spiritually attuned. A sleepless woman was poetic. A sleepless man? Probably a banker. This double standard didn't just exist in bedrooms, it bled into literature, art, and medicine. Ghost stories often featured women waking in the night, gasping at invisible intruders. Sleepwalking was romanticized, especially when performed in a nightgown beside candlelight on a thunderous staircase. But the truth? Many women weren't sleepwalking. They were just plain exhausted. Let's not forget the servants either. Working-class women slept differently, because they had to. Maids rose before the household, swept hearths in silence, and often shared cramped attic rooms with thin walls and thinner mattresses. If their employers had insomnia, so did they. And still, in the middle of all this restriction and routine, dreams found a way to bloom. Victorian dream interpretation became its own mini-industry. There were dream books, dream dictionaries, dream diaries bound in silk. People believed dreams could predict pregnancy, social disgrace, or sudden windfalls. Some upper-class women even hosted dream salons, where guests shared their visions over tea and shortbread, decoding each other's nocturnal nonsense like they were translating ancient texts. One eccentric duchess, whose name has been lost to history, was known for waking her servants in the night to ask if their dreams matched hers. A bit much? Sure. But oddly endearing in a gothic, sleep-deprived kind of way. Mainstream science hadn't caught up yet. Freud was still a few decades from fame, and Jung hadn't wandered into the forest of archetypes. But still, the Victorians knew their dreams meant something. Even if they couldn't prove it, they felt it. Meanwhile, architecture itself reinforced the era's sleep divide. The ideal Victorian home had separate bedrooms for husband and wife, not for romance, but for propriety. A woman might spend her night writing secret letters at a writing desk, while her husband snored obliviously in the next room. Separate spheres, separate dreams. This spatial division led to what some historians call the domestication of insomnia. sleeplessness became a quietly feminine affair. You tossed and turned beneath lace doilies and oil portraits, wondering if your worries were too heavy for your mattress. And in that solitude, your mind wandered, not unlike those monastic watch hours centuries before. And here's a curious psychological twist. Many Victorian women reportedly experienced their most vivid dreams just before dawn. Why? Possibly because their rest was fragmented, too much anxiety at bedtime, too much interruption during the night, so REM kicked in harder during those early morning hours. The mind cramming in its stories before daylight returned. You may recognize the feeling. In modern sleep studies, this is called REM rebound, a phenomenon where deprived brains prioritize dream-heavy sleep when given the chance. And it's not just exclusive to women, it's just more likely in those whose sleep is routinely disrupted. Hello, 21st century phones. Hello, midnight worries that sound just a little like, did I offend that person in 2017? So if you've ever found yourself waking before dawn, heart racing, mind brimming with fragments of surreal nonsense, it's not a bug. It's a very old, very Victorian feature. And as this nervous, nightgown-clad age dissolves into the 20th century, something brighter, artificially brighter, is about to flicker on. Because next, we'll see how a single invention, simple, glowing, innocent, managed to push bedtime into oblivion. You blink, and the shadows vanish. Not because dawn has come, but because someone, somewhere, flipped a switch. Electricity. There it is. The soft hum behind your walls, the tiny halo above your desk, the silent tyrant in your ceiling fixture. The light bulb doesn't just banish darkness. It evicts it. And with it, goes your ancestral contract with the night. We've stepped into the electric age now. Cities are swelling. Buildings climb skyward. And sleep, that ancient ritual tied to sunset and silence, is officially out of sync. The invention of electric lighting in the late 19th century might be one of the single greatest disruptions to human sleep in history. Sure, the factory whistle was loud. But this was silent. Constant. Undefeatable. You didn't need to wind it. You didn't need to trim the wick. It didn't flicker like a candle or cough like a gas lamp. It glowed, forever. Mainstream sleep research confirms what your body already knows. Exposure to artificial light at night suppresses melatonin production, delays sleep onset, and fragments rest. The later the lights stay on, the more your circadian rhythm gets bullied out of alignment. You probably won't know this, but in 1910, the average American slept nearly 9 hours a night. By 1942, it was down to under 8. Now, closer to 6.5 for many. That's not evolution. That's exposure. Fringe fact to keep you glowing: early adopters of electricity were so enthralled by nighttime brightness that some held literal light parties, inviting neighbors to admire bulbs in their sitting rooms. In New York, spectators gathered to stare at illuminated shop windows like they were magical creatures. In Paris, electric-lit boulevards were nicknamed nerves of the city, pulsing, shimmering, sleepless. Philosophers still debate whether this was liberation or the beginning of our insomnia spiral. Was light freedom? Or surveillance? After all, the more visible the night became, the less private and restful it truly was. Suddenly, streets no longer slept. Cities buzzed into the early morning. Nightlife exploded, not just among aristocrats and artists, but among workers, drivers, and janitors. The concept of a city that never sleeps was no longer metaphorical. It was literal. Neon signs blinked into the wee hours. Late-shift diners glowed like beacons. Time stopped folding gently into quiet. If you lived in an urban center during the 1920s or 30s, sleep became something you scheduled, begrudgingly. The noise of trams, jazz bars, and traffic layered itself onto your evenings. Bedrooms had to evolve. Heavier curtains. Thicker windows. Earplugs. Sound machines. You weren't sleeping with nature anymore, you were sleeping against the city. Mainstream psychology was catching on. By mid-century, researchers began documenting urban sleep syndrome, a not-quite diagnosis that captured the anxious, shallow, broken rest common among city dwellers. It wasn't trauma or caffeine. It was just too much stimulation, too late. And meanwhile, the advertising industry had an idea: sell sleep back to the people. Mattress companies promised better posture. Sedative teas lined pharmacy shelves. And electric blankets emerged to chase away the cold in rooms where radiators wheezed and insomnia hovered. Strangely enough, sleep started becoming something you bought. Not just a natural state, but a consumable one. A product. And like all products, it could be improved. Sleep was no longer sacred, it was supposed to be optimized. And yet, dreams refused to die. The surrealists, delightfully rebellious, embraced the night as their playground. They napped in odd places, chased hypnagogic states, and filled canvases with their subconscious chaos. Salvador Dali famously practiced slumber with a key, holding a metal key over a plate while dozing in a chair. As soon as he fell fully asleep, the key would drop, clatter, and wake him. He'd immediately sketch whatever dream image lingered. You may laugh, but it worked. He called them snap dreams. Others called them weird. But in an era obsessed with staying awake, Dali made his dreams into loud, melting clocks. Elsewhere, psychologists began examining sleep through laboratory lenses. EEG machines tracked brainwaves. Sleep stages were named REM, NREM, Stage 2. Sleep wasn't mystery anymore, it was data. But data doesn't always soothe the soul. Even with the science, city dwellers still lay awake. Tossed. Turned. Checked clocks glowing on nightstands. The city outside never slept, and, more, neither did they. Even leisure changed. Theaters ran late-night shows. Electric-lit ballrooms hosted dances until dawn. The middle class found themselves staying up later not from necessity, but from expectation. Social life demanded stamina. To decline an invitation was to be dull. And to be dull? Unthinkable. And so sleep became private again, not communal like it was in cottages or monasteries. Not spiritual. Not even social. It became a secret retreat. You closed the door. Shut out the noise. And tried, desperately, to turn off the buzz in your own mind. Here's the catch: many couldn't. Modern sleep studies show a strong correlation between urban density and sleep disruption. Noise pollution. Light pollution. Even social jet lag, when your weekend sleep schedule strays from your weekday one, arises more in cities than in rural areas. Your ancestors rose with the sun. You rise with push notifications and panic. But tonight, maybe you can feel the lull just behind all that hum. Maybe your body, though overstimulated, remembers darkness. It remembers quiet. It remembers surrender. Even now, as your screen glows gently, there's a part of you, quiet, ancient, candlelit, that yearns for real night. Not dimmed. Not postponed. Just night. And just as cities glowed brighter, the world itself began to darken. Because next, 2 great wars would rip the sky in half, and sleep would become a matter of survival. Now the lights flicker, not with elegance, but with urgency. You're not in a softly glowing city anymore. You're in a trench, or maybe a blackout-shuttered flat, or a factory that runs on grief and steel. The 20th century has cracked wide open, and sleep? Sleep has become something soldiers steal, mothers ration, and governments study like an enemy. 2 world wars. 1 nation of insomniacs. You may think sleep is personal. But in wartime, it's strategic. Start with World War I, imagine lying in a muddy trench, body curled into frozen earth, the sky above humming with artillery. You sleep when you can, but not for long. Not deeply. Rats crawl past your boots. Gas masks sit by your cheek. Any moment, the silence might explode. During World War I, sleep was not just scarce, it was weaponized. Mainstream psychology has since examined what was then called shell shock, but would now be recognized as acute PTSD. Many soldiers couldn't sleep, or only slept in bursts, plagued by hypervigilance. Their REM cycles were shattered, their bodies stuck in a permanent on switch. Some officers experimented with staggered watch rotations, trying to give men a few uninterrupted hours. Others simply handed out sedatives. If you've ever heard of bromide, that's where it comes from. A calming compound, dumped liberally into tea and chocolate to soften frayed nerves. Comforting? Maybe. Numbing? Definitely. Philosophers still question whether wartime sedatives were acts of compassion or instruments of control, meant to help soldiers recover, or merely to numb them enough to return to combat. Back home, civilians weren't sleeping much better. Air raid sirens shredded the night. Families huddled in underground shelters, sleep-deprived and anxious. And yet, they slept. Somehow. Curled against rubble. Between shifts. Under soot-smudged ceilings. Sleep became a rebellion against chaos. Then came World War II, and things got scientific. Governments launched full-blown sleep research units. The U.S. Army, for example, studied how long a pilot could function on zero sleep. Experiments were run on shift workers, telegraph operators, and radar readers. Sleep became a military resource, rationed, measured, manipulated. Fringe footnote: British soldiers were issued bennies, short for benzodrine, an early form of amphetamine. They kept you awake. Alert. Efficient. Sleep wasn't banned, but it was strongly discouraged when there were enemy planes overhead. German forces had their own version, too, Pervidin, another stimulant that created an entire army of chemically wired soldiers. Some soldiers marched for days without rest. Others suffered terrifying hallucinations from REM deprivation. One pilot reportedly tried to land his plane in a wheat field he mistook for a runway. Psychology studies in the decades since have confirmed just how catastrophic this kind of sleep loss can be. Cognitive breakdowns. Paranoia. Decision errors. All from a few days without REM. And yet, people adapted. Back in London, the Blitz forged a strange kind of nighttime solidarity. People slept in tube stations, curled on benches and stairwells. Some even decorated their underground bedrooms with rugs, curtains, and family photos. Sleep became social again, communal, even comforting. One woman, in her diary from 1941, wrote, "I slept in carriage 12 beside a woman who smelled of cinnamon and snored like an ox. I've never felt safer." Go figure. This blending of fear and fatigue shaped an entire generation. Post-war sleep wasn't about restoration, it was about recovery. If you've ever wondered why your grandparents were early risers or suspicious of naps, you're not alone. The cultural memory of disrupted sleep lingers longer than you think. And something else was happening too, something softer. The post-war boom brought not just peace, but a new obsession with domestic comfort. For the first time, bedrooms became stylish. Cozy. Aspirational. Sleep became something to nurture, not just endure. Pajamas were marketed. Bed linens became colorful. Sleep was still shaped by stress, but now it had a designer quilt. And yet, for all the softness, the scars remained. Veterans reported nightmares for decades. Civilians spoke of sleepwalking. Some psychologists noted sleep guilt, a reluctance to fully surrender to rest, born from years of needing to stay alert. Even after the noise stopped, the brain kept listening. Fringe moment? In 1952, a now-forgotten U.S. military psychologist proposed that national productivity could be increased by shortening human sleep cycles through phased napping. It didn't work. But the fact that someone suggested it tells you everything. Because sleep, once sacred, had become negotiable. And as the wars ended, a new tension crept in. The Cold War. Technological acceleration. Globalization. People weren't dodging bombs anymore, but they were chasing time zones. Working longer. Living faster. Sleeping less. You may not hear sirens at night. But your brain? It still flinches. Modern sleep research now shows that trauma, even generational trauma, can impact circadian rhythms. Nightmares. Hyperarousal. Insomnia. Sometimes, it's not just your stress, it's a ripple from someone else's past. And still, people dreamed. There are stories, quiet, unsourced, whispered, of soldiers who dreamt of pre-war days in vivid color. Civilians who dreamt of gardens while curled beneath rubble. Kids who survived bombings and grew up to become poets of the night. Sleep endured. Scarred. Scattered. But enduring. And now, as the wars fade into memory and the world paces toward prosperity, another kind of night takes shape, one bathed in consumer glow and suburban silence. Because soon, sleep will be sold with satin sheets and movie star glow. And insomnia? She's about to get glamorous. The smoke clears. The rubble is swept. And in its place, a perfectly trimmed lawn, a cul-de-sac, and a two-car garage. Welcome to post-war suburbia, where sleep is back, but now, it comes with rules, routines, and satin pillowcases. You're no longer hiding in a trench or huddled in a shelter. You're tucked under a chenille bedspread in a pastel-painted bedroom. The air smells faintly of talcum powder and optimism. This is the 1950s, and sleep has gone domestic. At first glance, it looks like rest has returned to its rightful place. Bedrooms are quieter. Bombs are no longer falling. People go to bed around 10:30 p.m. and rise early for work. But beneath the surface of this neatly scheduled life, a strange new kind of sleep pressure is brewing. Because now, sleep isn't just about health. It's about image. This is the era where beauty sleep becomes a concept and a commodity. Women's magazines urge you to sleep on your back, in a cool room, with a dab of cold cream and a pink satin sleep bonnet. Sleep isn't for dreaming, it's for preserving. You don't just rest. You perform rest. Mainstream psychology begins to split into two camps, those who view sleep as restoration, and those who view it as preparation, for better productivity, better appearance, better self-control. Sleep becomes one more item on your to-do list. If you don't get enough of it, you're not just tired, you're failing at being modern. Fringe alert, one 1950s beauty manual insisted that women smile gently in sleep to prevent frown lines. Because even unconsciousness wasn't a good enough excuse to relax your face. Philosophers still argue whether this shift was empowerment or entrapment. Did promoting sleep as self-care help reclaim rest from war and work? Or just repackage it as a performance women had to perfect? Meanwhile, on the other end of the social spectrum, something else is unfolding, the rise of the shift worker. Factories never fully stopped. They just moved to the suburbs, then overseas. And with them came the enduring problem of sleep disruption. Night shift nurses. Overnight janitors. Emergency responders. People whose schedules no longer synced with the sun, or even their neighbors. For them, sleep was stolen. Disrespected. Often poorly understood. Psychological studies from the 1960s onward began to notice something peculiar. Chronic sleep restriction in shift workers didn't just cause fatigue. It triggered memory lapses, mood instability, and long-term health effects. One longitudinal study even linked night work to higher rates of cardiovascular disease. The more your sleep clashed with the natural light-dark cycle, the more your body suffered. And yet, no one wanted to talk about that. Because the dominant culture, especially in post-war America, was obsessed with alertness. Think of the slogans, rise and shine. The early bird gets the worm. Don't be a lazybones. All thinly veiled codes for, you better not be in bed when there's work to do. And yet, people were so tired. So they turned to solutions. Enter, sleeping pills. The 1950s and 60s saw a pharmaceutical revolution in how we approached rest. Barbiturates and later benzodiazepines were prescribed liberally, especially to women. A housewife's little helper to take the edge off, smooth out the nerves, and knock you out cold. Advertisements promised peaceful, uninterrupted rest. The fine print rarely mentioned dependency. By the 1970s, psychologists were raising the alarm. Sleep that required sedation wasn't real sleep, it was a mimic. A chemical version. And long-term use dulled REM, muddied memory, and left people feeling groggy rather than refreshed. And yet, the pills kept coming. The culture split. On one side, the starlet, draped in silk, whispering about her 8 hours and her luminous skin. On the other, the shift worker, chugging black coffee at 2 a.m., hoping no one noticed the bags under their eyes. Both were tired. Just differently. Even pop culture leaned into it. Lucille Ball made jokes about snoring. Marilyn Monroe famously said she only slept with Chanel No. 5. Elvis had a sleepwalking phase. Sleep became a punchline, a plot device, a marketing angle. And behind it all, the average person just kept yawning. One curious phenomenon from this era: sleep clinics began popping up in small hospitals and university basements. Early sleep researchers stuck electrodes to scalps, peered into REM like explorers into a dream jungle, and discovered patterns no one had documented before. Sleep wasn't passive, it was structured, predictable, and full of meaning. You might be surprised to learn that the term REM sleep wasn't coined until 1953. That's the same year Playboy launched. Make of that what you will. As scientists mapped dreams and corporations sold mattresses, people began asking new questions. Why do we dream? What happens if we don't? Is 8 hours actually a magic number, or just a cultural invention? Sleep, once dictated by firelight or factory whistles, had now entered the realm of personal optimization. You could track it, improve it, market it. And yet, for all this awareness, people weren't sleeping better. They were just becoming more aware of how badly they were sleeping. This era planted the seed of our modern obsession with perfect sleep, a pursuit that, ironically, often keeps us up at night. Because soon, the bright lights of cities would be replaced by something brighter still. Smaller. Bluer. And always, always on. Next, sleep would collide with screens. And that collision? It's still happening. You're in bed now, but you're not alone. There's a glow on your face. Not moonlight. Not candlelight. It's artificial. Blue. Whispering scrollable truths. 100 timelines, a dozen notifications, a video of a raccoon playing a xylophone at 2:17 a.m. Sleep is close, but your thumb keeps moving. Welcome to the digital age, where light lives in your palm and sleep hides behind your screen. The 21st century didn't just extend the workday, it blurred it. You can work from anywhere, which means you can work from everywhere. Conference calls in the kitchen. Emails in bed. Deadlines that sneak into the edges of your dreams. And it shows. Mainstream psychology now recognizes what they call tech-induced insomnia, sleeplessness fueled by the very screens we depend on. Blue light from phones and tablets suppresses melatonin, delays sleep onset, and shortens REM cycles. One recent study even found that just 5 minutes of scrolling before bed could shift your circadian rhythm by an hour. That's one raccoon video too many. But it's not just light, it's stimulation. Your brain, wired to respond to alerts and novelty, can't wind down. Even after you close the app, your thoughts buzz like a group chat that never quiets. You lie there, wide-eyed in the dark, thinking about someone else's vacation photos and wondering if you remembered to reply to that Slack message from 4 p.m. Fringe theory time. Some researchers believe our addiction to bedtime scrolling taps into something primal, what's called social vigilance. In ancient communities, taking the last watch or staying up to listen for danger meant safety. Today, your brain interprets late-night scrolling as staying alert to your tribe, even if that tribe is currently arguing about whether cereal is a soup. Philosophers still debate whether we're facing a sleep crisis or entering a new phase in how we rest. Have screens defeated us, or are we just reshaping the meaning of rest in a hyperconnected age? Either way, sleep fragmentation is rising. Not just among adults, but among teens, children, even toddlers. The American Academy of Pediatrics now recommends screen-free bedrooms. But let's be honest, many adults can't manage that either. What used to be an act of surrender, slipping under covers and drifting off, has become something we schedule, monitor, and analyze. You may even track your sleep with an app, check your sleep score in the morning, and feel bad if you didn't get enough deep sleep. It's the Fitbit ing of dreams. And yes, the data's useful. But here's the twist, some people sleep worse after tracking. There's even a term for it, orthosomnia. It's the anxiety of trying too hard to sleep well. Imagine being so obsessed with resting properly that you can't rest at all. That's peak modernity right there. Sleep has become a performance again, like it was in the Victorian parlor, only now the parlor is global, and your mattress has Wi-Fi. And let's talk about global work culture. Because sleep today doesn't just get interrupted by your own choices, it gets eroded by time zones. Remote workers wake at 2 a.m. to catch meetings in Singapore. Coders work nights to align with Silicon Valley. Freelancers don't know what day it is, and honestly, who can blame them? One fascinating study tracked sleep cycles of gig workers across multiple countries. The results? Many had fractured sleep, 2 or 3 chunks of rest split across day and night, dictated by client deadlines and energy dips. Sound familiar? That's right, we've circled back to segmented sleep. The very thing we did before candles and clocks. Only now, instead of rising to pray, we rise to reply to emails from our boss in Prague. Progress? And dreams? They've become optional. Or escapist. Or shoved aside entirely. Studies show REM is often the first casualty of late nights and early alarms. You wake feeling groggy, not because you didn't sleep, but because you didn't dream. Still, people try to reclaim sleep. The wellness industry offers sleep sprays, white noise machines, apps with nature sounds and soft-spoken narrators guiding you into mindful rest. ASMR booms. Guided sleep meditations flood YouTube. You're listening to one right now, in a way, blending psychology, history, and hush. There's even a resurgence of naps. Power naps. Coffee naps. Workplace nap pods. Silicon Valley tried to turn them into productivity hacks. But let's be real, they're survival tactics. Proof that the body still remembers how to rest in small pockets, even if the world won't allow the full exhale. And here's a strangely comforting thought, even amidst all this chaos, your brain hasn't forgotten how to sleep. It just needs permission. Protection. A break from the glowing leash in your pocket. Because every night, even now, your mind tries to return to that old rhythm. The tide of drowsiness rising. The dream flickering on the edges. The self releasing itself for a while. So maybe, tonight, you turn off your notifications. Let your apps go dark. Let the world keep spinning without your supervision. Because soon, we'll see how old practices, like napping, begin sneaking back in. Global fatigue meets ancient wisdom. And for a moment, sleep becomes revolutionary again. Your phone is finally dark. The room hums with something softer. Maybe it's rain. Maybe it's the low, steady breath of your own body remembering how to rest without supervision. Because after decades of noise, of performance, of electric brightness, sleep is starting to get its revenge. And oddly enough, that revenge starts with a nap. We've reached the era of global burnout. High stress, low boundaries, cortisol levels that sound like stock tickers. People are tired, not just physically, but existentially. And in that weariness, something ancient begins to stir. Cultures that once surrendered their rhythms to clocks and capitalism are now looking back to what they lost. Welcome to the age of reclaimed rest. Take Spain, for instance, famous for its siestas, once ridiculed as outdated or inefficient. But in recent years, amid rising mental health concerns and exhaustion, siesta culture is being reevaluated. Some Spanish startups now build midday breaks into their schedules, citing studies that show napping boosts memory, creativity, and emotional regulation. Mainstream psychology backs this up. A well-timed nap, about 20 to 30 minutes, can improve alertness without causing sleep inertia, that groggy swamp you fall into when a nap turns into an accidental time jump. Even NASA got involved. Their studies on astronauts and pilots show that short naps significantly improve performance and reaction times. One pilot's 26-minute nap reportedly improved alertness by 54%. Not bad for something once dismissed as laziness. And it's not just Spain. In Japan, some companies openly encourage inamuri, a term meaning being present while sleeping. Employees who nod off at their desks aren't scolded, they're respected. It's considered a sign of hard work, not disengagement. Fringe detail for your inner sleep scholar. In some Japanese offices, there are designated nap zones with calming music and light-blocking curtains. One Tokyo tech firm even designed nap hats shaped like jellyfish that softly muffle sound while cushioning your head. Absurd? Maybe. Effective? Also maybe. Scholars continue to debate whether this nap renaissance signals a societal shift or just a coping mechanism for deeper dysfunction. Are we truly embracing rest, or simply patching over exhaustion? The answer probably depends on who you ask. But one thing's clear, naps are no longer the guilty secret of overworked parents or toddlers. They're trending. Respected. Even medicalized. Hospitals now build in nap pods for resident doctors. Schools test quiet zones for overwhelmed students. Airlines install lie-flat seats with lavender mist. There's a new, global permission to rest, briefly, defiantly, in the middle of your day. And still, sleep remains political. Access to rest is unequal. In lower-income communities, long commutes, multiple jobs, and unsafe housing environments make napping a luxury. Studies consistently show that wealthier individuals sleep more, and better, than those in poverty. Zip codes are better predictors of sleep quality than age or gender. Because sleep, like everything else, has been commodified. But the nap? The nap resists. It sneaks in. On buses. In back rooms. Behind locked office doors. A moment stolen from the schedule. A secret you share with your body. You might have done it too, head down on your desk, reading, or suddenly waking to the soft echo of your own snore during a pretend meditation. That wasn't failure. That was self-preservation. And in the wellness world, rest has gone full circle. The very practices once deemed inefficient are now Instagrammable and monetized. Yoga Nidra. Sound baths. Guided nap meditations. Entire studios now offer sleep classes. You pay, stretch into a blanket cocoon, and drift while someone whispers affirmations over ambient music. It's both deeply calming and extremely 2020s. Still, not all rest is performative. In many cultures, reclaiming rest has become a form of protest. Black feminist scholars like Tricia Hersey have championed the nap ministry, which frames rest as resistance, a radical act against grind culture and generational trauma. Her mantra? Rest is reparations. The idea that reclaiming sleep isn't just personal, it's political. Rest isn't a reward for productivity. It's a right. One your ancestors were often denied. And as that idea spreads, so does a deeper kind of rest. Not just naps, but restfulness. Quiet moments that don't serve a task. Eyes closed not because you must, but because you can. That's powerful. Because even in a world that runs on urgency and endless tabs, the human brain still remembers. It remembers mid-afternoon shadows. It remembers hammocks. It remembers silence. You might not live in a cottage or a monastery or a house with blackout curtains and jellyfish hats. But your nervous system is old. It remembers how to rest. It just needs the chance. And as more people reclaim their right to drift, a question rises: what exactly is sleep for? Is it just recovery? Or something richer? To answer that, We'll need to slip into a lab coat and watch someone dream under wires and electrodes. Because sleep science is about to crack open the mystery, and raise even more questions than it answers. Picture this, a quiet lab, white walls, wires snaking like vines from someone's scalp, and a monitor glowing softly beside a clipboard. The person in the bed isn't awake, but their brain is dancing. Spikes of activity blink across the screen. Eyes flicker beneath closed lids. Muscles twitch. Welcome to the age of sleep science, where your dreams are data and your naps are case studies. It all starts in the 1950s, when researchers Aserinsky and Kleitman, working in a University of Chicago basement, first documented REM sleep, that curious stage where the brain lights up like it's partying, even while the body is limp. They watched subjects twitch, smile, frown. Something was happening inside that sleep, and it wasn't just rest. This discovery cracked open a door. Sleep wasn't just passive. It was a process. A cycle. A series of stages your brain moves through, each with its own rhythm and purpose. REM. Light sleep. Deep sleep. And back again. On repeat, every 90 minutes or so, all night long, unless, of course, something interrupts. Mainstream psychology soon confirmed what we now take for granted: sleep isn't optional. It's foundational. It regulates memory consolidation, emotional processing, immune function, and creativity. Want to solve a problem? Sleep on it. Literally. In fact, one study showed that people trying to solve a logic puzzle were 60% more likely to figure it out after a full night's sleep. Your brain works the problem while you snore. That's impressive. And also a little spooky. But here's where it gets complicated. Scientists still can't agree on why we dream. Or even what dreams do. There remains ongoing debate over whether dreams are mental housekeeping, emotional therapy, or pure chaos. Freud thought they were wish fulfillment. Jung saw them as messages from the collective unconscious. Modern neuroscience? It says they might be memory rehearsals. Or emotional filters. Or just random fireworks with no deeper meaning at all. And then, there's the weird stuff. Fringe Theory Corner. Some researchers believe dreams are a kind of evolutionary defense mechanism, a way to rehearse survival scenarios. Your brain runs simulations: falling, fleeing, fighting, failing. You wake up more prepared, like a subconscious boot camp. Or an anxiety theme park. Others suggest that dreams help smooth social behavior. You play out interactions, process conflicts, resolve tension without real consequences. It's like emotional dress rehearsal while wearing pajama pants. Meanwhile, sleep labs across the world keep wiring people up. They measure brain waves, muscle tension, eye movement, heart rate. The results are fascinating, and often contradictory. One person's nightmare is another's creative brainstorm. One person dreams about flying, another spends the night at an imaginary DMV. And it turns out, how we sleep can reveal how we live. Psychology has found direct links between sleep patterns and mental health. People with depression often experience altered REM cycles, earlier onset, longer duration. People with anxiety may wake frequently, never dropping into deep sleep. Insomnia isn't always the cause of suffering. Sometimes, it's the symptom. And sleep paralysis? That eerie sensation of waking while your body stays frozen has been documented in every culture, often interpreted as spirits, demons, or alien abductions. In the lab, it's a REM glitch. In folklore, it's a warning. The truth, as usual, lives somewhere in between. And here's the kicker: the more we understand sleep, the more we realize how little we know. There's still no universal agreement on how much sleep each person truly needs. 8 hours is a guideline, but some thrive on 6, others need 9. Genetics, stress, lifestyle, age, they all shape your sleep architecture. Some people have dreams in black and white. Some don't remember anything at all. And don't even get scientists started on lucid dreaming, the ability to become aware inside your dream, and even control it. Studies show it's real. Trainable, even. One sleep lab taught participants to signal with their eyes from inside their dream. Wild, right? It's like texting from Narnia. Of course, we've also tried to monetize it. There are gadgets that promise to enhance your dreams, pillows that track your REM cycles, apps that whisper prompts while you sleep to shape your dreams toward success or creativity. And yet, for all the tracking, measuring, and decoding, the magic hasn't quite left. Because you can't always scan a dream. You can't download its texture, its emotion, the way it left you breathless or laughing. Sleep science gives us the maps, but not the journey. That's still yours. And as researchers peek deeper into your sleeping brain, they're uncovering something profound, that sleep may not just be a necessity. It may be a form of identity. A narrative. A secret version of your life unfolding quietly in the dark. Your dreams aren't random. They're stitched from your memories, your fears, your senses. They're coded in your first language. Populated by people you've lost. And people you don't even know you remember. And as our species stretches into new frontiers, digital, neurological, and literal, sleep remains one of the last human experiences that resists full control. Until now. Because next, we'll peer into tomorrow. A future where sleep is tracked, augmented, perhaps even optional. Where we sleep in space. In VR. In algorithms. It's all coming. But don't worry, you've still got time to rest before the future arrives. The future doesn't arrive with a whisper. It hums. It vibrates on your wrist, flashes on your nightstand, syncs with your breathing. You're not just sleeping anymore, you're tracking it, managing it, optimizing it. Welcome to the new frontier, Sleep 2.0, where dreams meet data, and rest becomes an upgradable feature. If the past shaped your sleep through candles, clocks, and culture, the future offers something eerier: control. You probably have something on or near you right now that claims to understand your sleep. A smartwatch. A fitness band. An app that color codes your dreams and scores your REM. And yes, this tech is helpful. Mainstream studies confirm that consistent sleep tracking can improve awareness of patterns, encourage better habits, and even diagnose underlying disorders. But here's the catch: awareness doesn't always equal wellness. People can become obsessed. Checking their sleep score becomes its own stressor. You wake up tired and disappointed in yourself, because apparently your deep sleep tanked last night. Welcome to data-induced insomnia. Philosophers still argue whether this is empowerment or surveillance. Is knowing more about your rest a way to heal? Or just a high-tech leash, replacing the factory whistle with a silent tap on your wrist? And the gadgets keep coming. Smart mattresses adjust their firmness mid-sleep. Digital headbands send gentle audio pulses to extend REM. Some devices even play real-time affirmations to influence dream content. You go to bed and wake up having dreamed of productivity, financial abundance, or your ideal self delivering a TED Talk on a cloud. Fringe experiment time. Certain research groups are exploring dream incubation, where participants are exposed to sounds, scents, or cues during sleep to influence their dreams, like slipping in a whisper during a dream about the ocean, nudging it toward memory or metaphor. Early results? Mixed. Fascinating. Slightly creepy. And beyond your bedroom? There's space. NASA, dealing with sleep disruptions in astronauts since the Mercury missions, has spent decades studying how to maintain circadian rhythms in orbit. On the International Space Station, where there's a sunrise every 90 minutes, night is a matter of scheduling, not light. Astronauts use eye masks, schedule darkness, and even melatonin to simulate earthbound sleep. One study found that even brief naps in zero gravity helped preserve mental clarity, and yes, they dreamed. Sometimes about Earth. Sometimes about floating. Sometimes, nothing. And if we go further? Say, Mars? Space travel experts are experimenting with torpor, a kind of induced hibernation where the body's metabolism is slowed dramatically. Not just sleeping in transit, but pausing in transit. Like science fiction suspended animation, except with actual cooling blankets and intravenous nutrition. And back on Earth, sleep is being redefined again, not just by location or tech, but by choice. Some companies flirt with the idea of bypassing sleep, using pharmaceuticals or nootropics to extend wakefulness. Others argue we'll never truly replace sleep, because sleep doesn't just recharge the brain. It rearranges it, cleans it, integrates experience. Still, biohackers experiment. Modafinal, microdosing, transcranial electrical stimulation to induce deep sleep in less time. We're not quite at Matrix-style plugins, but we're circling. And here's the existential question: if we could eliminate sleep, would we? If we could keep going, through pills, tech, or engineered evolution, would we give up dreams? Midnight quiet? That sigh of surrender when you finally drift off? Because the truth is, sleep isn't just about function. It's about feeling. That moment when your breath slows, your mind lets go, and you're no longer a name, or a job, or a to-do list. You're just floating. Sleep might be the last private thing we have. No algorithm knows exactly what you dream. No biometric can decode why you cried at 3 a.m. over a dream of a house you've never lived in. The future will try. But there will always be part of sleep that stays human. Messy. Meaningful. So tonight, as your body lets go of the weight it carried today, remember, you are part of a lineage. A timeline. A long, tender history of people closing their eyes against the dark and waking into light. You carry medieval rhythms. Monastic bells. Electric pulses. And maybe, someday, the slow drift of space. Sleep isn't just about now. It's a story written across generations. You inherit it. You shape it. And you return to it, every night, as yourself. And now, let's soften. There's nothing more to do now. The story has been told. Let your shoulders drop a little deeper into your mattress. Let your breath loosen. Let your jaw unclench, as if your body is remembering, oh yes, we are safe. We are warm. We are still. The lights of the past are fading. The whistles, the bells, the buzzing neon, all gone quiet now. All that remains is the sound of your own breath, like waves pulling in and out, gently smoothing the edges of thought. Sleep is not something to chase. It's something you fall into, like a soft tide returning you to shore. Even your thoughts can rest now. You don't need to solve anything. You don't need to be anyone. You don't even need to sleep. You just need to be here, in this breath, in this body that has carried you so far. Close your eyes, or don't. Drift, or don't. Just know that you are not behind. You are not broken. You are simply tired, like every soul before you. You belong to a long, quiet history. And you have earned this stillness. Good night, dreamer.